Hi, my name is Mr. Cordes, and today, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be talking about character voice and what that looks like when we analyze characters. You have done an activity that kind of looks similar like this, where you put in attributes and qualities of a character for like a character chart. That activity helps us understand who that character is, their motives, how they respond to others. Today's activity is telling us when a character talks and is in dialogue and conversation, what does that attribute to their attitude, and what does that tell us about who they are as a person? So what kind of qualities are they exuding, or what qualities are they conveying when they talk in our novel? So we've been working with Of Mice and Men. You guys have the PDF. I'm specifically going to be looking at chapter 2 today. The chart that you have in front of you is designed simply to, let's identify our character's name, let's identify a piece of dialogue, and then let's use our inference skills and our analysis skills to figure out what is the attitude that they're projecting, and then what are the qualities that are being conveyed. Okay. Now, chapter 2, we are introduced to a lot of new characters as George and Lenny get to the farm. They get to the bunkhouse. They're introduced to Candy. They're introduced to the boss himself. They're introduced to Curly, who is the boss's son. And then they're introduced to Curly's wife. Curly's wife doesn't actually have a name. She's just referred to as Curly's wife. We'll analyze her in depth later, but we will kind of begin to scratch the surface today of who she is as a person. So we're introduced to a lot of new characters, and we need to kind of figure out who they are based upon what they say. So just like if you're going to go to any novel, any well-written piece of fiction who has diverse characters, the dialogue and their voice sounds unique to them. So Hagrid in Harry Potter sounds very distinct and purposeful compared to, let's say, Hermione or Snape or Dumbledore. So you understand that each one talks differently. They have a unique voice, just like you have a unique voice, and you may say certain things or have inflections that kind of go along with your attitude and with your character as a person. So we're introduced to a lot of characters in chapter 2. Today, you have this chart in front of you. Today, I want to look at Curly, and then I want to look at Curly's wife. Both play significant roles in chapter 2. However, they're going to be significant through our story. We've looked at George and Lenny from chapter 1. We've kind of pulled them apart. We've kind of analyzed what their characters are. So I want to go into some other characters so that we understand them as well. So Curly, we know that Curly is the boss's son. We also know that Curly is short. Curly's like one of those little tiny tough guys who hates people who hates people who are tall simply because they're tall. He would be known as, we call it like the Napoleon complex, where they need to feel like they are in charge of something simply because of their small stature. So he's short. He's a short guy. His name is Curly because it does talk about his curly hair. And the other component, he is the boss's son. So he walks around thinking that he can do kind of whatever he wants, but that's not really the case. So if we look in our text, I've got my book in front of me, and I'm going to be going over to the second chapter. Let me come over here as well. So you see in chapter 2, let's make sure I'm on the right page. Here we go. Chapter 2, they begin talking about the bunkhouse. Candy's introducing them and telling them where they will sleep and what's going on. They talk about Crooks, who's the African-American stable-buck. He doesn't live in the bunkhouse. He lives on the backside of the barn. He's segregated during this time. He's not a slave. He has his own rights, and he knows he has his own rights. However, he doesn't have rights the same because slavery has been abolished. So he's kind of just on his own. We'll get more into Crooks later, but I love that character. He's such a fantastic character. looking at sorry, let me go back. The old swamper, that's Candy. Here he's introducing, he's got weed, or excuse me, he's from the town of Weed. He doesn't have weed. That's a whole other conversation. Okay. A lot of people actually think that George and Lenny were smoking weed. No, they weren't. They came from a town called Weed, which is a very unfortunate name for a town. Sorry. So let's see here. What kind of job? Okay. So in walks, they're also introduced to Slim. Slim is kind of like a mentor type character. Slim, he's a tall, slim guy, but he's very calm. He's very gentle. That might be a good word to describe who he is as a person. George actually depends on him quite some for kind of guidance. So if George has a question, he can't go to Lenny, he'll go to Slim. Okay. So coming through here, George says, I'm trying to find the part where Curly comes in. Pretty good. He's a nice fella. This one. Okay, so then that's when George is. Oh, here we go. So they were introduced to Candy's in the old swamper. Candy is introducing. Candy is a boy. Okay. Candy is introducing them to Slim, Crooks, who's the African American stable buck, and then in walks Curly. Okay. You'll notice here. Let me come back. It says Curly lashed his body around. By Christ, he's got to talk when he's spoken to. What the hell are you getting into it for? So you'll notice when he comes in, here he is coming in. It says, I'll try to catch him, Curly said. His eyes passed through the new men and then stopped. He glanced coldly at George and then at Lenny. His arms gradually bent at the elbows and his hands closed in a fist. One of the things for Curly is that he's a boxer. He is a fighter in the ring, and so as soon as he sees Lenny, who's huge and big, he just kind of squares up and he's like, "All right, I'm gonna take you out. I'm gonna take you out." And so, if you look at his dialogue, he begins to says, "You just coming in?" He says, and he addresses. He says, "You, the new guys, my old man's been waiting for." He immediately goes to Lenny to ask these questions, and George jumps in because he's protective of Lenny and says, "We just come in." And Curly responds, "Let the big guy talk." So here, George says, "Suppose he don't want to talk," and they begin to get in an argument. So you'll see the part here. "We traveled together," said George. "Oh, so it's that way?" George was tense and motionless. "Yeah, it's that way." Lenny was looking helplessly to George for instructions. "You won't let a big guy talk, is that it?" "He can talk if he wants to tell you anything," he nodded slightly to Lenny. "We just come in," said Lenny softly. Curly started leveling at him. "Well, next time you answer when you spoken to." He turned towards the door and walked out, and his elbows were still bent a little. I like that line like that right there. Well, next time you answer when you're spoken to. Okay, let's put that into our chart right here. Okay. Next time you talk when spoken to. Now, that doesn't sound grammatically correct. John Steinbeck is writing in a way that farmers would talk in the early 1900s. So that right there already helps us pick up on his dialogue. Curly's probably not an educated individual. Next time you talk when you've spoken to, like he lives on the farm. He's working. He doesn't have time to go to school and get an education. So from there, already we can tell the attitude. He talks and he kind of confronts Lenny. We can say right off the bat that his attitude is kind of we can use angry. Okay, we could use angry. He is angry. He's also trying to intimidate him. His attitude comes across as very intimidating. Okay, which probably shows, what does that show you if he's trying to intimidate someone? We already know that he's short. We already know that he's the boss's son. So probably all the other farmhands just sort of like, "Oh yeah, that's the boss's son," right? He's probably more than likely insecure. about himself. Also, it probably conveys that he's trying to like create some sort of dominance. He's trying to make himself feel known in that area. So he's trying to create fear or dominance among the other men. So his qualities, we already know, are not that nice. He's very unkind. He's very mean. He's just kind of came in and be like, well, let the big guy talk. Why don't you talk? You talking for him? Like, he's very argumentative. Maybe that could be his attitude as well. Argumentative. Okay. So what does this actually say about our characters? From this, we're able to tell, wow, there's a lot going on for him simply because he said, next time you talk when you've spoken to, right? He's almost giving an order, and he just met these people. Okay. Now, even though we have these components, we have to always dig deeper to understand what's happening. So just like when George and Lenny are in chapter 1 and they're having their beans for dinner, and Lenny pops up and says, I like ketchup with my beans. He's not doing that to say that he's like snobby or whatever. We have to understand that he has the mind of a child, and he doesn't understand that ketchup during this time is a luxury. Okay. And George, of course, gets frustrated because he feels like he can't provide, or that Lenny doesn't understand the bigger concepts, okay, of how life is going. So let's take a look at Curly's wife. We're introduced to Curly's wife in chapter 2. I love her introduction. Okay. Taking a look, let's go back over to our draft. Taking a look, Curly leaves, okay, and only moments later does Curly's wife come into the picture, okay? So as they come in, you'll notice, I'm trying to find the spot, married to, okay, so here's the part where it talks about Curly's been married just for a little bit, like 2 weeks, and then you get to the part down here where she comes and she stands in the doorway. Got louder. I got mad at you. Both men glanced up. Okay, here we go. Both men glanced up from a rectangle of sunshine in the doorway was cut off. A girl was standing there looking in. She had full rogued lips and wide spaced eyes, heavily made up, so she's got on a lot of makeup. Her fingernails were red. Her hair hung in little rolled clusters like sausages. She wore a cotton house dress and red mules. On the insteps of her were little bouquets of red ostrich feathers. I'm looking for Curly, she said. Her voice was nasally, brittle quality. Now it's interesting because Curly just left. They're on a farm together. So it's interesting that she goes in there to find him when more than likely she saw him leaving. So understand that Curly's wife is the only woman on the farm. She's a very lonely character, and she really has no one to talk to. The other part is she's married to Curly, and Curly is the boss's son. And if you get in trouble with Curly for whatever reason, you may lose your job because he could go to his dad and say, hey, you need to fire these people. So there's a dynamic there that's pretty interesting. You will notice that for Curly's wife, let me go back to our text. It says, I'm looking for Curly. Her voice was nasally, brittle quality. George looked away from her and then back. He was in here a minute ago, but he went. Oh, she put her hands behind her back and leaned against the doorframe so that her body was thrown forward. You're the new fellas that just come, ain't ya? Yeah. Lenny's eyes moved down over her body, and though she did not seem to be looking at Lenny, she bridled a little. She looked at her fingernails. Sometimes Curly's in here, she explained. And George said brusquely, well, he ain't now. George knows that he would get in trouble if he's caught talking to Curly's wife. Based upon that small interaction that he just had with Curly, he realizes that he would be in trouble if he was to talk to Curly's wife or even look at her. Right? So she gets in there and she props herself up against the door and she's like, oh, no, nobody can blame a person for looking. He was in here. He's usually in here, right? And then she's like, nobody can blame a person for looking. That's the next line that she says. If you look down, he says, he ain't. I guess I better go look someplace else, she said playfully. Lenny is mesmerized, right? And so George tries to end the conversation. He says, if I see him, I'll pass the word you was looking for him. She smiled archly and twitched her body. Nobody can blame a person for looking. And then there was footsteps behind her and in walks Slim. I love that line. I think that's a great line. Let's mark that down right here. Nobody can blame a person for looking. Now, this comes across extremely flirtatious. This comes across, and we could probably put this for our attitude. It does come across really flirty. Okay? People think at this moment in time that Curly's wife is trying to get with George, trying to seduce him. However, that's really not the case. Her attitude, sure, it's inquisitive. Her attitude comes across as kind of being naive and just like it says several times, very playful. Okay. She wants to know who these new people are as well. So she's inquisitive. Not how you spell that word at all. There it is. Good job. Love spell check, right? Love spell check. She comes across inquisitive, like, oh, I'm looking for Curly, right? She tries to be innocent, okay? But she comes across extremely flirty. She comes across as playful. What might be another word for that? I don't want to use like slutty or manipulative because those are extremes. Okay, again, she's not in this moment trying to hook up with George. She's literally she's almost trying to seek attention. And if she's trying to seek attention, we can infer that she probably feels lonely because Curly is not around. So let's put down her attitude is kind of wanting attention. Okay, which probably the qualities, she's lonely. We could mark down that she's playful, so she's kind of maybe lighthearted. Okay. She's not taking things seriously. She kind of stands in the doorway after this. Oh, he left. You should leave too. And she's like, yeah, sometimes he's in here. So she's kind of wanting to be incorporated into the conversation. She's kind of I think wanting attention might be the best way to say it. Okay. Now, from this, you could tell a lot about the characters. You can tell that Curly is angry. He's irritated. He's argumentative right off the bat. Tells us that he's really insecure about himself, that he wants to fight. He wants to almost prove himself. Maybe I'll write that in there. Prove himself to others, like he could do it. Curly's wife, she's flirty. She's lonely. And that comes across in a very playful manner. It's kind of like a 2 or 3 year old who comes into the room and says, I bet you can't tag me. And then kind of shimmies off to the side. In that case, the kid just wants attention. Curly's wife is doing that too. Now, again, she comes off as being flirtatious. The way that Lenny looks at her, like, just like eyes her, it kind of creates that tension between them. That's why as soon as she leaves, George goes over and be like, if she comes in this house again, you look the other way, because they don't want to get in trouble and they don't want to lose their jobs. So you can kind of tell what the character is like. The last one that I'd like you guys to work on is you get to pick. It's either Slim or Candy. What does Candy say that kind of helps portray who he is as this really old guy on the farm? His job is a swamper. The swampers would be individuals who kind of do odd maintenance around. They're not strong enough or young enough to go out and work in the field, so they would do things like help prep dinner, or there's a leaky faucet, they could fix that. They would sweep the bunkhouse after everyone left in the morning. Those smaller items. Slim is in charge. Okay, he's the leader of all of the farm workers. He's got a very gentle attitude. And he even comes in and begins to have a small conversation with George, and you can kind of see that. So you get to pick. You either pick Candy or Slim. Do the same components. Pick a piece of dialogue from chapter 2. What is the attitude that's being conveyed? And then from that, what are the qualities? What are the characteristics of that person? If we were doing a character chart like this, the character where the character part, like their attributes, their qualities, that coincides with this box over here. So this is another way of finding out who they are as a person, finding out how they are a person based upon their dialogue. Excuse me, that was a tongue twister right there to say that all at the same time. Okay, so take a moment, reread chapter 2 if you need to. Go back and listen if you need to as well. Check out Slim, either Slim or Candy. And I hope this was informative for you guys about how dialogue and character's voice helps us determine who they are as people.